Hello and welcome to the live stream. It's been a while since I last streamed, but let's see how it goes. I don't really have anything planned. I'll just generally be talking about the war, these coming weeks, what's happening in Belarus, what's happening in Russia, what's happening in Ukraine, what's happening in Europe, the front line, everything. And if you have any questions, just ask and I'll answer. That's usually how I do it. Also, if you think my webcam should be elsewhere or anything, just shoot straight ahead. Okay, so both are waiting for something to happen. But my opinion right now is that the situation is that Russia has actually started their offensive. And what I mean by that is that they are setting up, they are shaping the battlefield for their coming winter offensive. And the goal in the south for the winter offensive is definitely taking the Donetsk region, but it could also be taking the Zaporizhia region as well. So this southern part would be their goal, in my opinion, for this winter. To take the rest of Zaporizhia and the rest of Donetsk. And while at the same time there's the large concentration of forces in Belarus, especially with this last couple of days with the sudden operational performance check, where there's been a lot of movement towards Brest specifically, but also a little towards Gomel and the rest of the country. However, I think we aren't quite there yet, as I believe they will not start their offensive until at least around Christmas, as that is when the weather will be more optimal than it currently is. Hello and welcome back to Unsaturated Fat. Long time no see. It has indeed. And Wolf Steiner, hello again. And hello to everyone else. Kiss of the Gamer, hello again. It's a couple of the same guys since the last time I was live, but yeah, so let's get into it and let's see what happens. All right. Okay, so starting out with something important like that, let's get to Telegram real quick. Okay, here. So there is this specific Telegram channel, and this one is really good because they cover all the troop movements in Belarus. And this is for yesterday, where how many troops they moved and where they went and so on. And as we can see, most are going to Gomel. There's basically from everywhere, most is going to Brest, I mean. This is Gomel. So there's some going from Gomel to the center, and there's some saying it going to Gomel and has arrived, while most is going to Brest, where there's a ton from Minsk going to Brest, and there's some here in the northwest that is going back and forth and arriving. There's also some here at the center left. But yeah, most is going to Brest, and there's a lot arriving at Brest. And this was yesterday. And if we compare that to the day before, which was the 12th of December. And not this one, this is there. I think this one. Yeah, 12th of December. No, that's the 4th of December. How far up did you go? Okay, this was the 13th. So we need to go further up to the 12th, which is right here. There we go, 12. As you can see, there's a lot arriving at Brest as well, but other than that, there's barely any movement. Today is much more. And if we look at the 11th, it's much less. There's the 10th, this is the 11th. As we can see, there's barely any movement. And the 10th, there was a bit, but not that much. So we see that yesterday, there was a ton of movement compared to any other day in the past week. Yo, JK. I remember watching your stream during vacation and they were really good. Good to see you streaming again. Yes, and I remember watching you. I remember being watched by you as you were commenting a lot. So I'm happy that you're watching again. Odessa is totally knocked out of electricity for a week now. No heating, no water. People are rioting. Can Ukraine population survive the winter? That's another question, and I will not be speaking about that because I have no idea about that subject, as I have no idea exactly how hard the electricity is hit. They claim that currently it's 50%, and I'm sure that if any European country was hit by 50%, then they would have nothing left. But before losing 50%, Ukraine was in a state where they could export a lot of electricity. And if they are receiving some from Europe, then they should be able to survive with 50 for a while. And I'm not sure how long, but definitely for a while. And then there's the point of how resilient is the Ukrainian population and all of these things. And I'm not going to get into it. And yes, as you can all see, I got a green screen, but I can't use it properly yet because I also need a light. And currently the color difference, there's a difference between the color to the right and the color to the left. So I need one stable color, and I do get that by having a light. And then I also need to make sure it doesn't, that the cloth itself is straight. So yeah, I'll have to set up a bunch more stuff, but yeah, it's coming along. What is the link of this Telegram? I can put it in the chat. Here. View channel info. Link. There we go. Copy link. Your way of analyzing things are super. All the best, my friend. Thank you very much. I appreciate the nice comment. Thank you. Thank you for participating in the stream and watching. All right. Okay. So, what else? There's been a bunch of updates since my last update, and I actually want to talk about Bakhmut specifically because that's the focus point right now, but also because I didn't know this before this update today. And as we can see right here, here, assault detachment of PMC Wagner broke through the defense of the armed forces of Ukraine on the eastern outskirts of Bakhmut. So we know that due to that, there is Wagner PMC in this area to the north. I don't know why this is here. Okay. So we know there's Wagner right here to the east of Bakhmut. But then we also see Russian units have established full control over the Champagne Winery and Sinyat Winery to the southeast. Fighting is going on near the waste sorting plant and Fyodor Maximenko Street. So the plants are these plants right here, and then this street right here. These two streets. So this means that there are both Russian units and Wagner in Bakhmut to the east, and then we also know that Upitne is filled with Wagner groups. So we have Wagner to the east and to the south, and we have Russian units to the east as well. This means that the units fighting in Bakhmut is actually both Russian units and Wagner PMC. And before I just thought it was only Wagner PMC. But with this, it explains why they suddenly had the ability to advance all of this, because before they were stuck around Upitne and Veselizolina for a long time, and then suddenly they got Ivanrad, and then they got Upitne, then they got Koryomivka, Osarianivka, they're now fighting at Klishchivka, they've entered Bakhmut, they are fighting at Pitorotne. At the same time, they got Yakovlivka, and all of this happened within like a week's time. And now that Russian units are participating on the front line in Bakhmut, that explains why they're capable of doing that, because that means that they have a lot more troops to work with and better equipment and so on. Enjoy your reporting, Tubbs. Thank you very much. Upitne has been liberated yesterday. I have not seen any report on that. If we look at Ryber's map here, it says the northern part is still contested. And if we look at Wargonsil, at their map earlier today, I don't know why it does this. But yeah, their map earlier today, there we go. Then we look at the Bakhmut area. We still see that the southern part is not taken. So according to Wargun, so it's not taken either. And then we go to Twitter, where we have both Syriac mapping and War Mapper. And Syriac mapping and War Mapper. Right there. And we can look at his latest map, which is right here. Opitna is also not completely taken. It's contested to the north as well. And if we look at Syriac mapping, we also have Russian-Ukraine war. We also have here Opitna, northern part is contested. So on all the maps that I follow, the northern part is contested, so I would not say that Opitna is now under Russian hands. Is it true that Ukraine have shut down all 14 drones before hitting their goal? Is nothing hit by Russia, no casualties, no damage at all? I heard there was some drone strikes earlier this morning, but I haven't followed up on it, as I haven't really focused on that. I've been more focusing on the frontline updates. It is why Russian troops are holding their position. Because they are able to do so. They started building their defensive lines and are then able to do so. And rather the question is, why shouldn't they be able to hold it? Is it almost impossible to receive information of both sides, Russian and Ukrainian, of losses? We have to compare one side losses with the other side losses to know really who is gaining and who is losing. So no side actually wants to report casualties, honestly. There's the own casualties, they want to undercut it, and then there's the opponent's casualties, they want to oversell it. So in both cases, they're exaggerating or reducing the number of losses. I actually saw a video, I'll look for it later, and then I'll put it in on my Twitter and my community, because I think it's a really good video, where a guy talks, it was 4 years ago, he talks about casualties of war, and then he was looking at documents from the Second World War. And then he compared a dogfight between Japan and the United States, where the Japanese army claimed they destroyed something around 16 United States planes, American planes. And then the Americans said they only lost 4 planes in that fight. And then the Americans said they destroyed 15 planes. And then the Japanese said they only lost 5 planes. Oh no. The Japanese said they destroyed 15 planes, but they only destroyed 3 planes. And then the Americans said they destroyed 16 planes, but only destroyed 4 planes. So Japan exaggerated by 5, and the United States exaggerated by 4. Which means that both exaggerated with about the same numbers, about the same degree. And if we apply that to this, where Ukrainians state that they have killed 90,000 Russian troops, and then we say they exaggerated by 4 or 5, that means they would have killed around 20,000 Russian troops. And then the Russians state they have destroyed like 5,000 Ukrainian tanks, then they would have destroyed about 1,000 Ukrainian tanks. So that means both sides have had losses, very significant losses, but not at all to the degree that they're stating, because they're all exaggerating to a very large degree. And this is all based on historical perspectives, so it doesn't necessarily apply to this. However, the human nature and the tactical strategy of war science, military science, implies in the same way. So both the officers who are on the field and the generals who receive the data have an interest in exaggerating. So if they double up twice, then that's 4 times, and so on. Are the Belarusian army gonna join Russia in the winter offensive? I think so. And I think so not necessarily because I think Belarus wants to, but because Belarus is set into a position where they have to, in the sense that Russia has sent a lot of troops to be trained in Belarus. Approximately about 400,000 since the war started, of which most are still in Belarus. So there's a lot of Russian troop presence in Belarus, both training and trained. And the last batch will finish in about 1 or 2 weeks. With that, we see that Russia has a lot of troops and have an interest in attacking from Belarus. And then they state that they have created this joint military grouping in Belarus between Russia and Belarus, which means that both Russia and Belarus have troops in the same units, which means that they're most likely both going to attack from the north once winter starts, once the weather allows it. Russian 6th Cossack Brigade LPR Katyusha rocket batteries are just north of Bakhmut, hitting the American and Polish mercenaries in the forest area northeast of Bakhmut that was taken by the Russians. So this area right here, somewhere around here, one of these two. And yeah, sure, I think so. Luhansk is right next to it, and they don't have a lot of territory to fight in. And I think generally Russian troops and LPR and DPR troops are mixing a lot together nowadays, since they have been annexed, which means that both Russia and the Donetsk People's Republic and the Luhansk People's Republic are technically only the Russian armed forces, as the state in Russia has decided so. Russian 6th Cossack Brigade. If you look ahead into the future, what do you see as the most likely way this war end? If you had to guess, pick one way. Okay, so this book, Karl von Clausewitz, book on war books 1 and 2. In this, he states that war is a extension of diplomacy, and the aim is to disarm the enemy and utmost exertion of power. And that means that they want to, or both sides want to disarm the enemy, make the enemy incapable of fighting. And they also want to use as much power as possible, in the sense that if Russia uses everything they can, they will overpower Ukraine. And if Ukraine uses everything they can, they will overpower Russia. That's the idea behind it. So how do we reach a peace once a war has started? And that is by either one side is incapable of fighting by being disarmed, or when fighting is worse than losing. And that is, if you put it into perspective, if Ukraine loses 100% of its power, they have no heating, they have no clean water, and so on, their population will eventually die out. At the very least, most of the population will just die. And that is an outcome that is, in my opinion, I'm not sure about the Ukrainian government's opinion, but in my opinion, I'd rather see Ukraine annexed by Russia than Ukraine dead, with no population, no people, and just a destroyed country. So, in my opinion, if I was the leader of Ukraine, then I would stop the war, ask for peace, even if it's disfavorable for me, then watch the population starve and freeze to death over the winter. So I think that's the Russian perspective on this. They want to destroy the energy system, they want to destroy everything, heating, food, water, everything, so that in the Ukrainian government's eyes, creating a peace treaty where they lose the south or whatever Russia demands is more favorable to them than continuing the war. Either that or destroying the Ukrainian army completely. But with the Western supply constantly coming in, they realized that, or the Russians realized that they cannot disarm Ukraine, because the more they destroy the equipment, the more the Western countries will just send. They'll just send everything to replace everything that Russia destroys. So in that sense, Russia cannot disarm Ukraine. Or at the very least, it'll take as much time as it'll take to make war unfavorable for Russia. In that sense, they either have to sign a peace treaty or make the situation more unfavorable for the Ukrainians, so the Ukrainians want to sign a peace treaty. And in that situation, is what the Russians are trying to create right now. They're trying to create a situation where the Ukrainian governments think it's better to sign a peace treaty that is unfavorable for us than continuing this war and losing our population and economy and so on. So that's my perspective on how this war will be in the future. And it completely depends on what opinion the Ukrainian government has on the war and on the suffering of its people and the Russian ability to continue the war and continue destroying the Ukrainian energy grid and how resilient the Ukrainian people are and so on. Why Ukraine not counterattacking in Zaporizhia? Because it requires a lot of prerequisite operations. Need to do a lot of they have to check out the situation. They have to scout the locations. They have to destroy the supply lines. They have to destroy the Russian defensive positions. They have to gather their troops. There's a lot of preparation, and they haven't finished that preparation, so they're not going to attack. The giant banner on the top of the screen sucks. Okay, thank you for that feedback. I was just thinking, okay, let's make a poll. How do I do that? Engage audience here. Start a poll. Okay. Banner on top or just black screen? Because if I remove the banner on top, it'll just be a black screen with nothing on there. There you go. Okay. The first casualty in war is truth, yes. Ukraine have 40 million population, so lots of people to mobilize. Well, they started out with about 45 million, of which a lot are working abroad and so on, blah, blah, blah. So we can take that down to 40 million, of which about 13 million are refugees. So that puts it down to 27 million. Then there's about 6 million in the occupied areas. That puts it down to 21 million. So we have about 20 million in Ukraine, of which, let's say, 20% is above 60 and 10% is below 18. That's 30% less. That's 14 million. And then if we remove the necessary workers, the government officials, this and that, then we end up with about 5 million. And of the 5 million, we say about 1 million is already fighting. So that's 4 million left. And if you remove those 4 million, if they end up dying in the war, that's something that Ukraine cannot recover from. So essentially, no, they do not have infinite soldiers. They barely have any left, because losing any more than what they have mobilized is very bad for Ukraine in the long term, and it is not something they can just come back from easily, even with Western support or whatever. Pro-Russian source reported that Ukraine had 1,400 killed in action yesterday, of which 1,011 are regular soldiers, huge losses. And if we add that previous logic, then that would be about 300 KIA. What happened? Where? What? What happened? Where? What? What do you think of Peskov's recent statement alluding to someday holding referendums in Chernihiv and Odessa? Is this further hinting to opening northern front with Belarus? I believe so, yes. Do you think Ukraine can defend such a large-scale offensive from the north? They will eventually stop the offensive, but I think the offensive will gain initial momentum, and after that, it'll slow down, and then we will see who will be able to adapt to the situation the fastest. If Ukraine is slow at adapting and is not able to properly close up the gaps and so on, then they will not be able to hold back the offensive. If the Russians are slow to adapting and end up with low supplies and bad supply lines, just like in the early winter, late winter, the start of the war, then they will probably fail in their offensive. I think the next front to open will be Chernihiv, and once fully engaged, the main thrust will be Sumy. So you think something along the lines of this? Well, I believe, my personal opinion, I think they will try to take Zaporizhia and the rest of the Donetsk region, after which they will try to attack Dnipro, and then they'll move northwards to Poltava, and then they will engage from Sumy as well, and they will attack from the Chernihiv area as well. This all to focus on the eastern side of the Dnieper River, after which they will then focus on the western side by attacking through Belarus. And they'll most likely try to destroy the bridges. That is my tactical analysis, strategic analysis. If the Russians are capable of that, they have enough troops now, so they have no excuse other than their tactical and strategic abilities. If they're not able to, then they are just failing as an army. And I decided I want to come with the truth in this war. I need to report the truth. That's why I'm doing this. And to be able to provide with truth, I have to provide with my honesty as well. So if I have to do an honest assessment of the Russian army so far throughout this war, from February to now, we are almost 10 months in, I believe the Russian army is, or was, very corrupt. It didn't have nearly enough strength as it's supposed to, is not capable of defending its own country, and a lot of other stuff that is horrible for a country like Russia, and they're way below my expectations prior to the war. However, I will give them that they have improved both their leadership, they've improved their logistics, they've improved their whole command chain, they have improved their supply lines, they've improved everything that can be improved. They're also improving their technology, their production, and everything on the Russian army is being improved. They're improving, they're fixing their issues. So I believe that what we saw at the start of the war was a horrible Russian army. What we're seeing right now is a developing and improving Russian army that will be dangerous if they succeed in this war. And I think that is why NATO keeps upping and increasing their support for Ukraine, because they realize if Ukraine falls, Russia will be more dangerous than they ever were. Because unlike Ukraine, Russia has a population of 144 million. They are now learning a lot more about what works and doesn't work in war. They're improving their strategy, they're improving their quality of their troops, they're improving their training, their supply chain, or everything is improving. And that is bad for NATO because NATO sees Russia as an adversary. And further teamwork or a collaboration between Russia and China is also very dangerous for the West, because with Russia and China combined, they both outnumber and outproduce the whole West combined. So they're in a situation where if Russia continues improving, that is very bad for the West as a whole. How old are you? I am 21. The difference is that Russia retreats when they are in danger of taking big losses. Ukraine sends in more troops when they are in danger of taking big losses. No, they also retreat when they're in danger of taking big losses. As we saw with Lysychansk, they pulled out about 10 to 15,000 troops who were fighting there and defending the city, and they pulled them out. However, in the process of finding out that they cannot hold a city, like right now they're fighting in Bakhmut, they do not know yet if they're able to hold it or not. At some point, they will step their foot down and say, okay, we can, or okay, we can't. And with that, they will either pull them out or not. So they're very significant losses. They know when to step their foot down and pull them back. However, the Russians, at just a small amount of losses, when they are losing a few soldiers and have a risk of losing 500 a day compared to 100 a day, then they already pull back. So they pull back very early compared to the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians may lose 1,000 a day before they pull back, where the Russians will already pull back when they lose 300 or 400 a day. That's what we saw at Kherson. They had been fighting for many months, and then they realized, okay, if we continue like this, we're in danger of getting encircled, we're in danger of getting stuck, we're in danger of losing 20,000 troops. So we'll pull back. And that is similar to what they saw at Isium. They had very weak lines, and Ukrainians found out, okay, the Russians are very weak here. And then they had a large concentration of forces in Isium. They realized, okay, we're going to lose the north, so we're going to pull back. Instead of fighting against them, instead of counterattacking, they just pulled back because they realized they were in a disfavorable position, so they would not want to fight. But the Ukrainians fight even if they're in a disfavorable position, because they will always be in a disfavorable position. That's why they try to make the best of every situation they have. Bakhmut is better to fight in Bakhmut than fighting in most of these other places all the way to the Sloviansk-Kramatorsk line. And if they lose this whole area, then Siversk will be in danger, then the man will be in danger, and so on. So they see it as a favorable or more favorable position to fight in Bakhmut and defend it, then pull back to a better defensive line, because that endangers other areas that they fought very hard to get. So, Bakhmut is important, so they're willing to fight for it. As soon as the importance falls, then they will pull back. That area, American British mercenaries were operating there. What area specifically? Where are you from? I'm from Denmark. Can you talk about the 2 bridges Ukrainian destroyed at Bakhmut, so the Russians aren't able to do their offensive if they get there? And why does Russia not hit their critical supply lines or bridges? Okay, so if we look at the area, there's this canal right here. The Ukrainians destroyed the bridges that go across, and then they've also destroyed a bridge here to the north. I'm not sure. I think it's this one that they destroyed, or these ones down here. Whichever they are, they destroyed some bridges up there, and this is most likely due to the Russians advancing on Pithorodne. If the Russians manage to take Pithorodne, then their supplies will be cut from the north anyways. So they decide, okay, instead of leaving the Russians a ability to pass through and make use of this northern road, then we'll cut off the northern road ourselves before they gain access to it, and then they will just receive their supplies from the south. However, the south is also in danger, as the Russians are also attacking Lysyivka, which means that there is an indication that Bakhmut may be left behind soon or abandoned soon, as the Ukrainians are realizing it's becoming more and more difficult, and the Russians are pouring more and more resources into it. So what they're trying to do in Bakhmut right now is inflict as many casualties as possible on the Russians before retreating to a safe place as soon as the situation seems unfavorable to the Ukrainians. And they're able to pull off such a strategy because the Russians are on the offensive, which means that they know where the Russians want to attack. The question is whether or not the Russians want to take control of the city at what cost. Like, exactly how much are they willing to offer to take Bakhmut? Next one. I can show how it'll look. Okay, if we look at how it'll look, it'll be first of all. Okay, so it'll be like this. That's how it'll look without the banner. Seems global warming skips winter. Global warming isn't just that the world is heating up. It is also that it is generally just that the climate is changing. So colder countries become warmer, warmer countries become colder, and so on. I don't remember what term was, but the center of the world, latitude was. The center of the world in this direction is becoming colder, and both hemispheres are becoming warmer, which means that the South Pole, Antarctica, and the North Pole will both start melting. Greenland will start melting, Canada will start melting, Russian Siberia will start melting. All of this means that a lot of ice will fall down to the ocean and sea level will rise. This will make the world colder, and we'll receive another ice age. So essentially, it's boom, 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 movements, a lot of stuff, scientific blabber, blah, blah, blah. And then we'll end up with things that is very horrible for European countries, from African countries, from American countries, from Asian countries. The only country that will benefit from global warming is Russia, because Siberia will melt, and unless a very horrible disease comes from Siberia, then that's just a lot of a lot of 1,000 square kilometers that Russia can just get more resources from and settle down in. The banner is okay, it's a color choice. Interesting. Can you show how to look? Why does Ukraine doesn't attack Donetsk with HIMARS? Because they're already attacking other places that they deem to be more important than Donetsk. When will the big Russian winter offensive start? How reliable is the info of 540,000 soldiers ready to attack? How reliable is the info? I think it is fairly reliable, because the training centers in Belarus have been training since April, and we've seen so far that training of Russian soldiers usually takes between approximately 3 months, and April to December, that is 8 months, and specifically was 33 weeks, and 33 plus 3, that's 36, that's 12. That's 9 months, and 9 months is enough to train all the soldiers, the 540,000 troops. And then if we look at the fact that 3 weeks will be January, start of January, and that is optimal weather conditions for a large offensive. So my guess would be around start of January for a large winter offensive by the Russians, where all their troops will be ready, their troops will be trained, equipped, and so on, and all of that other stuff. Hi from Russia. Hi, Lex Krivorukov. The municipal attack was explosive and under the bridge. There wasn't even enough to destroy it completely. Bridge near Kherson was hit with many HIMARS rockets and was still working. Indeed. Stop the supplies, then destroy. Looking handsome, bro. I know. Thank you. Hey, Weepian Union, why do you think the Russians haven't blown up all the bridges on the Dnieper River? It will create a terrible supply situation for the Ukrainians like the Russians had in Kherson. I believe they haven't done so yet, because honestly, I ask the same question every day. I don't know why they haven't done it yet, because it will give them such a huge military advantage that it makes no sense for them not to. Pretty sure Ukraine sends all their offensive forces to die in Bakhmut. I don't think so. I think they're all in Zaporizhia, building up an offensive. The Sumy area would be west, then south to north to turn the Kharkiv flank. So something along this. And then if they attack from the south as well. Yeah, that would be a very, very strategically competent choice. Reports Ukraine has run out of missiles for the S-300 and BUK systems. That would actually make sense, because Russia has destroyed their factories since the start of the war. And with that, they would be in a position where they cannot produce more, so they would rely on their stockpile. And since they've been using it constantly since the start of the war, then it would be weird, or it is weird that they still have, as other former Soviet countries could have some ammunition as well, so they could be using that as well, and whatever else, whatever other possibilities they may have. Is it possible that Ukraine attack Transnistria to take the many weapons and ammo stockpiles that are there? I would say that it's almost impossible because Moldova would consider that an attack on Moldova because Moldova claims that to be part of Moldova. Also, they would be doing an aggressive. That's an aggressive offensive breach of all blah 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 United Nations rules or whatever. So I don't think so. If they do, then a lot of people would be pissed off. I don't think it was meant to be a fast war. Every time America conquers somewhere fast, they fight insurgents for 20 years. With both sides committing filtration on all combat regions, there won't be very many potential insurgents left for 20 years. I think generally the Russians expected Ukraine to want to be part of Russia. There was reports from, of course, the CIA, so it is most likely, what's it called? Propaganda. However, there were reports that some Russian troops had actually bought hotel reservations in Kiev back in February. So they were like, okay, we're just going to move in, they'll welcome us, and then we'll just go to these hotels and have a vacation. And if we look at the supply situation, a lot of other stuff, it either indicates that there was a lot of corruption in the intelligence gathering area or a lot of corruption in the military or both. Considering that the forces that invaded Ukraine was not enough to beat Ukraine, and at the same time they were expecting something else than what they received by fighting Ukraine. Like they didn't expect as much resistance as they got. Your predictions have to match a time expectation. If it is 5 years war, Russia is best off grounding Ukraine in Donbass, where they have better supply lines and extending Ukraine's. Do you agree? I agree. I agree that if it's a long-term war, then the closer they are, the better. However, I disagree with them fighting in Donetsk. As we can see, Donetsk city itself is the front line. So if they want to place themselves in a situation where they are just grinding down Ukrainian troops and want to get rid of all their weapons, etc., then that would be better off doing it here in these fields between Kharkiv and Dnipro in this area here, as it is less populated and not as pro-Russian as these areas, and it'll still be close to Belgorod, to Kharkiv, to Donetsk, and so on. So this area here would be the best area to pull off such a strategy, especially with how well defended the Donbass region is. It's very industrial. There's a lot of fortification that's been built over the years and so on. So it's a unfavorable position for the Russians to fight in, and would be way more favorable to fight in the north, for example, around Chernihiv and Sumy area, and Zaporizhia or whatever. As Chernihiv is generally more pro-Ukrainian than the south, then they would be more inclined to fight the Ukrainians in the area and so on. So generally, if they really care about Ukrainian population that supports Russia and all of these other stuff, then they would be more inclined to fight in the north or further in Ukraine rather than where they are right now. Anything east of the Dnieper River is easier for Russia to supply than Ukraine. How many non-nuclear weapons did Russia have when they disabled their nuclear warhead missiles to regular fuel barrel missiles? I'm not sure. How will Russia keep up economically? I'm not sure. I think they have made a lot of deals with BRICS specifically, but also other countries within that sphere, and are able to sell a lot of their natural resources. Russia has the advantage that most of its resources are based on, most of its money is based on natural resources, which they have an abundance of. And all that also means that other countries are reliant on it and do not have alternatives. If the European countries want to buy more fuel, gas, and so on, they'll have to buy from other countries. The other countries will just buy from Russia and resell it to Europe at a higher price. So either way, Russia will have it sold. Why do you think Russia wants to hold Ukraine? Because Russia has always wanted that, both geopolitically, strategically, historically, and all that stuff. All of them put it in a situation where Russia would prefer to have all of Ukraine rather than just bits and parts of it. The only argument against Russia taking all of Ukraine is that Russia is incapable of doing so. And I would agree, if Russia is incapable of doing so, then they will not do it because they are incapable of doing so. But as long as they are capable of doing so, then that would be their objective, to take all of Ukraine. It's what happens to the front line if Bakhmut falls. Then Russia will have the ability to advance in 3 directions, which will be to the west towards Konstantinivka, to the north towards Slavyansk, and to the east towards Siversk. This will give them an opportunity to essentially take this whole enclave here to the south, as to the north of this enclave is the Severodonetsk River, and to the south of it, the Russian positions will have their positions here, and essentially they will be able to capture this whole area. And with that, you'll be able to push towards Slovyansk, Kramatorsk, and Konstantinivka. And this is the largest and strongest and final defensive line of the Donetsk region for the Ukrainians. If the Russians break through this area, then they'll be able to push all the way to Pokrovsk and to Alexandrivka and all of these areas at the very edge of the Donetsk region, and they'll be able to capture the whole region. So Bakhmut is step 1 of 3 of capturing the Donetsk region for the Russians. Step 1, Bakhmut. Step 2, Slovyansk, Konstantinivka line. Step 3, the Alexandrivka, this whole line here, this end. So these 3 lines. Breaking through here gives them access to line 2, which will give them access to line 3, which will give them all of the Donetsk region. So that's why I think the Bakhmut is very strategically important. And I think the reason Western media say it suddenly isn't is only because they are expecting Ukraine to lose it. So they want to lessen the blow once they lose it. They're preparing the population and the people to receive or reach a place where losing Bakhmut will not hit as hard. To remove NATO, strategic pullbacks are part of war. You pull back, blah blah blah. I'm not a hardcore fan of your channel. Do you do all the stuff just as a hobby, or is your profession somehow linked to it? Okay, so my profession is not directly linked to it, but my personal interest is very linked to this. I've always been a fan of military history, as well as modern conflicts. I've been following the Ukraine war for years, not just when the war started or in July where I started this channel. I've been following it for years. Last year in April, I was talking with some friends and talking about how it's only a matter of time until Russia invades Ukraine because military buildup, all of that stuff, how Ukraine is getting more and more aggressive against the Russian language and Russian heritage in eastern Ukraine, how the ceasefire breaches are daily. Like, if you look back before the war, the ceasefire breaches would happen of the Minsk agreement would happen every day. Most of the Minsk agreement's points were not being upheld. So it was only a temporary peace. And I knew that Donetsk would never be able to win against Ukraine. So I always expected to invade. So I've been following this for a long time, and I thought, okay, I'm following it for a long time. The war started, I'm still following it, and I'm following it really close and putting all my time into this. I might as well just do everything I can to bring out the truth. Because whenever I looked at what was actually happening and what Western media would report to me, I just thought, this isn't the truth, this isn't what's happening. I need to be able to send the truth to the ones I know, so that I know that at least the people around me know the truth. So I was talking with them, and then eventually I decided on making this YouTube channel so that anyone who wants to know the truth will be able to come and find the truth in this open platform. Can move the logo the top corner, so like this. I'll not put it further up than this. If they blow up the bridges over the Dnieper River, they won't be able to move past river without taking Kiev because of how wide and deep it runs. Okay, so you're essentially saying if they want to blow up the river, the river, they need to take this area. Otherwise, the Ukrainians can just pass through this area, or what is it exactly you mean? Like, they could just attack from Belarus if they want to go around. They can go around, they don't have to go through. They can blow them up, and then they can invade from Belarus. Okay, black screen on top in all videos. Okay, I'll just return to that. How many Ukrainian soldiers would you estimate have died? Okay, so how many Ukrainian troops do I believe have been killed? If we say that the number for the Russian army is about 30,000 troops killed, including Wagner and Chechens and all the other participants in the war from the Russian side, 30,000 killed, then I would expect the number to be between 60 and 90,000 for the Ukrainians, and that is because Russia has had, throughout this war, a 9-1 advantage in firepower. Everyone admits this. NATO admits this. Europe admits this. Ukraine admits this. Russia has had a 9-1 firepower advantage in this war. But firepower isn't everything. There's also numbers, all of these other things. So generally speaking, Russia has had a huge advantage, although not enough. However, this means that most areas where the Ukrainians have been doing counterattacks, except for Kharkiv, because Kharkiv was a quick success. For example, Kherson and the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. The Ukrainians have suffered heavy casualties in these areas, and that is because of the heavy firepower, especially in Kherson. Kherson has seen the most Ukrainian losses other than the Donetsk region. So Donetsk has had the most due to Donetsk itself, the very slow grind back and forth, and this severe firepower advantage of the Russians. And Kherson because the Ukrainians were on the offensive for about half a year in that area. So they have been attacking constantly for a long time, and the Russians have just held their ground, fortified their positions, and so on. Also, if you have seen the pictures of the trenches the Russians have built in Kherson, they are much higher quality than the Ukrainian trenches there. They have a lot of pallets on the floor to avoid flooding so they don't get cold feet and wet feet and disease. And they have walls, they have heating, they have everything they need. While the Ukrainians would just dig trenches, muddy trenches with water on the ground because they didn't have the same resources and supplies that the Russians had. And then we also saw the area around Davydiv Brid where they had to cross the river and have to fight in this enclave with constant bombardment of planes and artillery, and the same with the north and the south. Just constant artillery and bombardment and planes and so on. That gave them a lot of casualties. The same with the Donetsk and Bakhmut and Lysychansk and so on. This whole eastern area has seen a lot of Russian bombardment and planes and so on, constantly bombarding Ukrainian positions. And as such, I would expect their casualties to be at least double, but most likely triple that of the Russian casualties. So if the Russians have lost 30,000 troops, 90,000 wounded, so 120,000 casualties, the Ukrainians would have about 90,000 killed and 270,000 wounded, so 360,000 casualties. So between 300 and 400,000 casualties throughout this war. That's what I believe. Tintin, I have an anime channel, but I have only uploaded one video and it's low quality, so I'll not be sharing it yet. But one day, when I make good anime videos, I will share that as well. Also, it's in my name, it's Weeb Union War Updates on this channel, so. How come Ukraine still have a working air force is mind-blowing? I think it's because they lose their planes, they get repaired, then they lose them again, then they get repaired again, or they get donated some. At some point, they got donated some from Slovakia, some at some point probably from Poland as well. So they have been getting donated some, and they have repaired some, and so on. So yeah, they don't have this. The original Air Force is probably completely destroyed, and then they keep receiving new ones, and they keep repairing, and so on. They want Odessa still. For that, they need to cross the Dnieper River or Zaporizhia because the bridges in Kherson have been damaged, so they can blow these in case Ukraine pulls last ones. Okay, so as I said, Russia could blow all the bridges across the Dnieper River, and then they can advance from the north, and then they can just go to Odessa from the north. I believe that this would be the optimal thing, because if they blow the bridges, take eastern Ukraine, then they can pull all their forces to Belarus and just attack through Belarus. If Ukraine loses all of eastern Ukraine, then they would lose a lot of their ability to do other mobilizations and a lot of stuff. However, they could, what I believe is the reason they haven't done so yet, they could have received a warning from NATO stating that they're not allowed to blow the bridges, because if they blow the bridges, then NATO would say that it's a humanitarian catastrophe or something like that, and then they'll go in and use that as an excuse to defend the Ukrainian people, because NATO is in a position where they cannot allow Ukraine to lose, because they know if Ukraine loses, then they are worried that they'll be next. Will Poland be next? Will the Baltics be next? Will Finland or Romania or Moldova? What will be next? They don't know. They are scared that if Russia becomes more competent, then they'll be able to fight with NATO. Especially because the United States has to worry about China as well, because China is a very fast-growing player. By 2050, they will outpower the United States, unless the United States does a huge military buildup. And even if they do so, they may still be overpowered by 2050. So the United States is running against time here. They need to win something. They need to get Russia on its side. They need to beat China. They need to do something before they lose their hegemonic power over the world. Some may argue they are not the hegemony anymore, but I would still argue that they are, considering the fact that the West is still... The East cannot do whatever they want. They have a lot more freedom, and they can compete with them. But if the United States says they are not allowed to do something, then they will not do it, as we've seen so far. Like, China has not invaded Taiwan. You could argue, okay, it's because China sees that Taiwan will join them peacefully in the long term. That could be true, but I also think that China's holding back. But then again, I'm not an expert on this field, so I'm not be talking that much about it. Yeah, but then Ukraine can pull all its forces to defend that front also. Not if they are, like, okay, right now, about 80% of Ukraine's forces is in this pocket here. If Russia blows the bridges, then they are completely isolated. They're cut off from all supplies. They'll have no way of getting supplies unless Ukraine literally invades Belarus and creates their own go around the Dnieper River. So if the Russians blow the bridges, 80% of Ukraine's army is surrounded. So what army will they put to the north? They cannot put more than they already have there. If they put the rest of the 20%, then they'll just still be outnumbered by the Russian army to the north. Yes, Russia increased budget to 35% of GDP. Russian people will suffer over this. They did not increase the budget to 35% of the GDP. They increased it to 35% of the Russian state budget, which is different from the GDP. And the Russian people will not suffer from this because the Russian the Russian society does not rely on the state budget. Tax in Russia is very low. It's a very spacious country. They have more than enough resources for everyone. Even in a scenario where everyone is dirt poor, they will still have enough food to eat. They will still have heating. They will still have everything they need. You cannot say the same about Europe. If Europe is poor, Europe sucks. The only reason Europe is a good place to live in right now is because they're rich as shit. Whereas when it has to watch the east, etc., I cannot defend any front as well if all bridges over a river are below the waters 1 to 2 degrees Celsius in winter, 100 plus meters wide and south in most places. If they look like losing all the bridges, they'll pull forces in east back towards Kiev. Yes, they will. However, that will be a long process. If 80% of the army is here and Russia decides, okay, we're going to attack soon, we're going to reach Kiev and cut them off. At the same time, they blow the bridges. Then they are cut off. They can attack from Kharkiv, they can attack from the Donetsk region, they can attack from Zaporizhia. All of these areas, they can just they can outrun the Ukrainian army. All right, I'll take one more question and then I'll end the stream as I think it's gone on for now. I think that's good enough. Any thoughts on Russia-China relationships in the future? They are allies now, but I don't think Russia plans to become Chinese client states by 2050, but they can't really side with Europe, at least right now. I don't think there'll be a client state. I think Russia and China will continue to be friends. Right now, neither side has any interest in becoming enemies. They are being pushed to be together and be allies because of the Western antagonism to both states, as they differ from the Western values. However, even in the future, I don't think they'll have an interest in doing anything. Russia's population is in decline, so overpopulation and all of that will not be a problem in the future. If they want natural resources, they have great deals with Russia, they can buy it for cheap and so on. There's no reason for them to fight unless the West basically doesn't exist. So unless there's a global world war where China and Russia wins, China and Russia will stay friends for at the very least the next 100 years. That's my opinion. Alright, that's going to be it for this stream. Thank you all for coming to the stream. Thank you all for watching and have a great day. And see you all next time.